Hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi.
Okay. Let me just change my name. It's like school's been on, so
Yeah, I understand.
how are you?
Hi, I'm good. So just for posterity, this meeting is being recorded um,
Okay,
in order for us to use later on.
sure.
All right, so let's get right into it. Hi. So my name is Kenneth Pui. I live in Union City. I'm a researcher with Fremont Now. We're a community-based organization that, wants to get the local vote out. You are Jatinder Palsahi, uh, NUHSD board candidate for Area 1. Yes?
Correct.
Okay. So Ms. Sahi, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, like your background and experience?
Sure. So I grew up in Kansas. I grew up attending public schools, starting from kindergarten. I was a minority. I actually, after my brothers went up to high school, I was the only brown child in my elementary and junior high school. So it was not a very diverse area compared to Union City. So I have been involved in New Haven Unified School District since quite a few years ago when they were, the first community project I was on was when they were renaming Alvarado Middle School. So that was my first involvement. So that was quite a few years prior to my daughter joining elementary school. Since then, I have participated in committees at the district level and at the school site. I am a parent of a fourth grader. So this is her 5th year at Guy Manuel Elementary School. And we've seen some of the struggles that we as parents and community members have gone through over the past couple of years. It was a struggle 2 years ago, and there were lasting effects on my child, and I could only imagine how parents of other individuals who were going through when teachers weren't showing up and what children do. It had an impact on parents, children, teachers, and I think as a community as an entirety for us. So my goal and my purpose for running is, one, I don't want to see these same issues popping up over and over. Let's resolve them. Let's move forward. Yes, there's budget issues, but let's think outside the box. Let's see how can we resolve those issues in regards to budget. How can we find sustainable income even as our student enrollment is declining? Number two, I want our teachers to be able to live in our community. I don't want teachers to be commuting 2 hours every day just to come to a school site to teach kids. And third, I want to see more programs across the school district that are dispersed equally among the schools. So right now there are programs available at certain school sites that are not available at other school sites. And does it have to do with the affluency of that particular school site? I don't think it should matter. Each school site should have all the programs available across the district.
A lot of people would argue
I'm going to stop there and I'll let you ask questions.
Yeah, no, I honestly, my style of interviewing is I just let the candidate usually talk out to an open-ended question and I ask questions accordingly. So while we're on that subject about school programs and affordability for teachers, I did want to talk about, like, as a board member, obviously you control a part of the budget allocation. How would you effectively allocate what we have right now with the current tax revenue of Union City in order to match with those programs that you mentioned?
So I think when we start programs, we need to look at programs and see how can they be sustained across all school sites. We cannot be starting programs and say, okay, this is what the cost for it to implement it 100%. We need, and then you implement 10% of it at one school site and leave, all the others behind. That leaves a disproportionality in regards to the availability for schools and children that are in areas that don't receive much funding. So there are areas. So every year schools also do their own fundraising.
Right.
And the fundraising is different. And my counterpart or my opponent has brought it up. Well, he's been on the school board for 4 years. Why hasn't it been brought up as an issue for him before, when and his children didn't attend elementary school, quite a few years ago? But for me, I see it as an issue because even at the elementary school level and at the middle school level, I see it. I've seen parents talk to me about it. And, now that we are on a virtual system, how are those kids being affected through the virtual system? So it's not just one area, it's multi-level. Are the teachers being given the same resources? That's another issue. If we have kids going to the high school level where they're at different levels when they come from the different middle schools, why is that? Why are we not looking at those numbers? And in regards to budget, how do we implement programs and sustain them? So when we're in a different organization, I manage a nonprofit, I have to look 6 years down the road and see, if I implement a program now, can I sustain it 6 years from now? At the school level, we need to look at the same. We need to be looking 6 years down the road. And right now there is Prop 15 that's on the ballot, and we don't know how November is going to be, whether it's going to get approved or not. But even Prop 15, there's not a certainty of the funding that school districts will be receiving. So there still may be a gap, and every year may be different. So there may be, a difference in how much is allocated to each school district. So even if Prop 15 gets approved, we still need to be ahead and think, how can we bring in more to sustain those programs that I'm talking about across all the school districts? And there's partnerships. We can develop partnerships. We're in we're in the heart of Silicon Valley. Why can't we develop partnerships with some of these organizations?
Right. I think a lot of people would take issue with what they perceive to be as like privatization of schools if we start partnering with these sorts of larger corporations. What would you say in response to that?
It's a partnership. It's not privatization. It would be similar to a grant program. So it's not private. Grants. So I don't know if you're familiar with how nonprofits run. Nonprofits run on grant money, grant and individual donations. So the nonprofit that I manage, we run on grant donations. So if I receive a $100,000 grant from an organization, that doesn't mean that it's part privatization. They're spending their social responsible funds. What is it? Socially responsible funds for these kinds of programs.
Sort of like a charity,
right?
Fund.
And why, there's a lot of funds available towards STEM programs. So why would we not partner with these innovative organizations it doesn't have to be a large organization. It can be smaller organizations that are up and coming. Why would we not support our local smaller organizations and partner with them?
Right.
I don't consider that privatization. I'm not saying let's, bring $4 million from a Google, right?
Right. They're just using the funds that they already have set out for these kinds of issues.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
That's
Those are the partnerships I'm talking about.
Okay. I think a lot of people would, be worried about that kind of stuff. So it's good that we nip it in the bud.
Well, and partnerships is, we're not just talking about, a Google or a Facebook. There are so many other organizations out there. There are school districts that have thought outside of the box and have been able to be successful and not have to worry every year when you're doing a cost of living adjustment for teachers or staff. They're not worrying, where's that money going to come from? And with the decline in enrollment in New Haven, the amount of funds coming from the state are not going to be increasing.
In regards to that kind of like budgetary stuff, do you think COVID has affected us in any way that you could see for the foreseeable future?
Yes. So I don't know if you read my background, but I actually manage medical clinics.
Medical clinics, yes, nonprofits.
So my clinics had to close down. And when the clinics reopened, we spent a lot of hours strategizing how they're going to reopen. How are we going to be doing the cleaning? How are we going to, do we have the funding for the PPE? What measures are we going to take when somebody tests positive? So when schools reopen, the same things come into mind. I see the schools as very similar to the clinics. You're going to have children there, even if they do the hybrid model. How is the staff that they have currently, how are they going to be cleaning? Is that their job? Is that what they initially brought on to do? So when you have a group A and you have a group B, as they're talking about in the hybrid model, how are we going to be ensuring that everything's been sanitized between the two groups? And who's going to be doing that?
Right, and I also, like, on that subject, I think a big part of like the discussion right now is whether or not schools will be open in the spring, like in-person operations. As a school board member, what steps would you take to ensure that the schools are safe to reopen in the spring, if it's feasible?
So I'm looking at resources. So I can give you an example. The number of custodians that the schools have is already pretty low. So one thing that I'll look at is how is everything going to be sanitized? Number two is based on county guidelines, county and CDC guidelines. They have very strict guidelines on how CDC does. And then Alameda County has its own guidelines on reopening. And then if students test positive or teachers test positive, how is that going to affect the entire group? So there's many factors to take into place. And what is the positivity rate in the current area within Union City that we're at? So those are all the factors to look at. And then making sure that the Teachers Association is comfortable, that they have ratified whatever the agreements are, and that there's the appropriate training done with all the staff. I can imagine, right now reopening schools, I see kids, I see, 6, 7-year-olds, and it's hard for parents to tell them wear a mask. And
right.
They're in school trying to wear a mask. I mean, that's a lot of effort that the teacher's going to have to take just for a child to keep wearing their mask.
Well, I mean, when I was in elementary school, we used to trade things all the time. I imagine, elementary school kids start trading masks. It'd be kind of a mess.
Yeah. And, higher grade levels, my main focus is, yes, there is the higher levels, but I think we have kind of lost focus in the lower grade levels. And that's my main focus is, starting from time a person enters, we have TK. TK is like 5-year-olds. So how do you manage 5-year-olds when you're coming back to school?
So it's a little difficult, I imagine.
Yeah.
Like, what sorts of concrete policies would you enact in order to mitigate those kinds of crises from happening?
So one, you need to have the basic is, what is the protocol when students come in? Are we checking everyone's temperature? Are we just doing a little checklist? How much are we trusting parents to check everything? So, and do schools have the resources to be able to do that? Do you have if you are going to be checking temperatures, or do you have the thermometers, the no-touch thermometers? Do you have the appropriate, my understanding is they do have PPE, but do you have enough to last, a while? Because a little kid who doesn't have a mask and is wearing one of those plastic masks, or the general surgical masks, they may be going through 4 or 5 of those in a day.
Right. Sneezing and whatnot.
Sneezing and just playing with it. I've seen kids who've gone through at least 2 or 3 in a couple hours. I mean, little kids.
Yeah, a little unpredictable.
Yeah.
And an alternative, if schools aren't able to reopen and we have to continue with the current model of online learning, what would you describe as some pros and cons of online learning?
So speaking of I'm gonna first talk from a parent's perspective, and then I've actually been a lecturer at Cal State, so I'll talk, and I've done online classes and in-person classes. So as a parent, I think the schedule that the children have is, my child's in 4th grade, and I've seen kids kind of mess up their schedule where they're supposed to be at what time. I see that as a challenge. And for new kids coming in, we have kindergarten and transitional kindergarten. So I've heard feedback from, especially from the children who are in the dual immersion program. That's the Spanish, and then, so we have 2 dual immersion programs, Spanish, and this year we started Mandarin. So those parents have given me feedback that it's hard for them to have a 5-6-year-old sit and try to understand because they're teaching in a different language. Especially sitting in front of a computer. It's very difficult. And one is learning the computer, the Chromebook itself, and 2 is trying to be in a classroom setting, which for a 5-6-year-old may be difficult. So I think the schedule has been a challenge, and the Chromebook. But on the other end, I think teachers have done a great job in learning the systems and communicating with the parents. I can tell you from my own experience that teaching in person and teaching online is very different. It's very different. At my clinics, we went from going from paper records to electronic records. We lost providers because they did not want to learn the computer. So I can only imagine that teachers, everyone has their own current learning curve. So they've been able to learn the systems and be able to teach the kids appropriately. It's very different. You're looking at everyone on a screen versus looking at everyone in a class.
I mean, the fact that we're conducting this interview through this medium instead of meeting in person speaks for itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of unrelated tangent. I did earlier want to ask you about the strikes last year, but we sort of skimmed past that, so I'll go back to it. I know that last year, a lot of the anger was focused around the fact that not only were the teachers not going to get a raise, that the board members were in fact going to get a raise. And when the deal was eventually worked out, for every percentage that the teachers' salaries would increase, the board members would increase proportionally. And that sparked a lot of outrage in the community. Do you think, as board member, you would take steps to prevent that sort of issue from ever happening again, and how?
So that's one of the things that I've been looking at is what is, what does the board member receive, and what is their, because if you go and you do a search online, you'll see what exactly the board members receive. I don't believe that there's certain things that should be looked at in regards to when you're doing budget. This was there's 2 unions. We need to look at the unions, and we need to keep our board members separate from that. They are there as elected officials, and I think they need to maintain that line of being an elected official versus being a staff member.
I see. Would you say that the idea of labor issues, specifically in regards to the teachers, is an issue of utmost importance to you?
So unions are there for a reason. They're there to protect the workers. And I want to see our teachers being able to live in our communities. So if you look at some of the teacher salaries, I think, cost of living adjustment, the COLA, that's exactly what it is, the cost of living adjustment. Based on where you live and, what the general increase in expenses in your area is. So I'm all in favor of being able to provide enough resources and adequate salary for our teachers to be in our communities. They shouldn't have to be living 2 hours away and commuting every day.
All right. So questions further about your background. This is, again,
Sure.
kind of a detraction. I know that you worked with healthcare nonprofits and you have, I believe, an MBA.
Yes.
Would you say that this public sector experience that you have with working nonprofits in the past will translate effectively into working with the school board?
I definitely think it will. One is I work with people from all different backgrounds. I work with vulnerable populations. I understand the needs and cultural differences of the communities that I serve, and it's very similar to the community of Union City. I understand inequity. I have gone from from not having a reserve to building a reserve for my nonprofit. I have built community partnerships, and I've gone through some of these issues similar issues that the school board's going through.
As of right now with budgetary issues?
With budgetary issues, correct.
I see. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
And it will not be a learning curve for me. Like I said, I've been an instructor. I've lectured at Cal State East Bay in their master's program for quite a few years. And I understand budgetary budgets and financing. I completely understand that, and I understand the teaching aspect of it.
All right. So this is just kind of a capstone question before we close it off. What would you say that you bring to the school board that hasn't been done before?
So I bring the idea of thinking outside the box in regards to budgets. Every year, it's the same thing over and over. Budget, have a budget deficit, budget deficit, budget deficit. Well, what can we do to mitigate that budget deficit? It's not privatizing the school district. It's building relationships, partnerships, and what other funding is out there that we can tap into. That's one of my main goals. And second is I see inequities. I'm a parent. I'm a parent of a young child going through elementary school. I want to see those inequities go away. I want to mitigate some of those and bring programs across the school district to every child. Every child should have the same opportunity from the time they enter kindergarten to the time they graduate James Logan High School as a senior.
All right. Thank you for your time, Ms. Sahi. This has been a really conductive interview. I'm going to stop recording in a couple seconds.